am no theologian, I confess this morning, but I invite all of us to be theologians this morning, because it's not only God who despairs at what she has created and at what we, her children, are capable of, but it is we who wonder at ourselves and the world we have created and are creating. To be a theologian means to think seriously about the nature of reality, of humanity, of divinity, and of our own fates and destinies. Considering the fact that we are all living, laughing, crying, questing, hurting human beings, it's inevitable that we will wrestle with the big questions. Thus, the invitation to be theologians. It's up to us whether our own lives feel meaningful or not. It's not enough to say we love and live in the questions, like the man and woman in a conversation I saw in a New Yorker cartoon that went like this. Don't worry, Howard, the woman says. The big questions, they're all multiple choice. Questions about life and love may be complex, but we can't be moral or even just good people in generalities. We have to work out the specifics for ourselves. So I invite you to be theologians this morning, just as we enter the summer months when hopefully we all will have a little more time for reflection. And I do have a short video just to get us started in our studies this morning.
Let's picture an out-of-control trolley. In this case, we'll use a train hurtling towards four men who are stuck on the track. Steve is on board the train and notices that the conductor is incapacitated. He doesn't know how to hit the brakes, but he does notice a lever that would switch the train to another upcoming track. If he pulls a lever, the train would switch tracks, thereby saving the four people on the track ahead. But here's the rub. On that alternate track, there's one guy who's similarly stuck and would face certain doom if Steve decides to spare the four others. The question then is, what should Steve do, morally speaking?
What should Steve do? What would you do? This is called a thought experiment. I'm inviting you into a thought experiment together. It's not meant to be real or realistic. It's meant to help us clarify ideas and discover truths. For example, our own moral principles. The idea is that you can't get out of the situation. You have to make a choice to pull the lever or not pull the lever. You can't, you may be thinking this, run down the track, untie them, and push the people out of harm's way. Anybody thinking that? You can't shout out and warn them. From where you're standing, you can't see how old they are, what gender they are, who they are, if they might be a friend or a relative. All of that is irrelevant. There's only one question: to pull or not to pull the lever. It's simpler than real life, in that there are only two options, no multiple choice here. But unavoidably, just like in real life, what we choose has a consequence, whether we want it to or not. In this case, either one person will die or four people will die, period, based on our action or lack of action. What would you do? Make a choice in your own mind now, because I'm going to tell you what other people chose in just a second. 89% of the people who engage with this thought experiment used in ethics classrooms all around the world pull the lever. Philosophers call it utilitarianism, doing what will do the least harm to the most people. Which means that most of us, 9 out of 10 of us gathered here, think it's better if only one person dies instead of 4. Because the scenario is so uncomfortable, though, for example, when I tried it on my husband last night, he told me that he's never been able to choose, so I'm guessing some of you didn't actually land on a choice. People like to argue their way out of even having to make the choice. So some of our friends in Oklahoma would say, for example, it's God's will for the four to die. I have no right to interfere with God's plan. Abraham seemed to think this. But we can always argue back, what if God put you there to pull the lever and save the 4 people? What if God created you with a conscience precisely because she wants you to do the right thing? What if God was testing Abraham, waiting to see if her beloved son would rise to the challenge and choose failure over duty, would choose love over power? Other neighbors, family, and friends might say, it's just not our place to interfere with the natural cause of events. What is, and we just have to accept it as it is. But we can argue back. But what's natural isn't always good. We fight forest fires. We get out of the way of tornadoes when we can. Why wouldn't we do something to stop people from getting killed if we can? At which point, some of your friends and family might try this way to get out of making a choice. I don't care what you say you do. I couldn't pull the lever. It's better to let people die than to kill someone. Which is a very tempting argument, because we don't have to feel guilty that way. But do you remember that scene in Breaking Bad? For those of you who watched it, how many of you watched that TV series? Oh, good, a lot of you. The other ones can fill in. You'll understand the scene even if you haven't seen this. It's a great TV series. There's this scene in which Walter White, who's the protagonist, he's a chemistry teacher turned drug dealer because he's trying to raise money for his own cancer treatment. He lets his best friend and business partner's girlfriend die from choking on her own vomit when she's passed out. So she's done drugs, she's lying down, she's choking. He's watching her when he could have just turned her over and saved her life. Is he less guilty because he just let her die? Is he less guilty than if he had outright killed her? I don't think so. In my mind, he killed her. And it was the turning point in his life, in my mind, after which he couldn't find his way back to being the person he was before. Abraham is spared this fate, but the story and his struggle are like a great thought experiment. What are we willing to sacrifice to appear to be good people? And what are we willing to sacrifice to really be better people? The truth is, life is more like a thought experiment than we might have imagined. We're forced to choose what we think or hope is the right thing to do, whether or not we feel ready or able to make the choice. So let's alter the thought experiment a little bit. 4 people on one track, 1 on the other. You all have it? So let's imagine the one person stuck on the track alone is someone you love very much. Maybe it's your mother or your spouse or your child. The question then becomes, would you change your mind and let the trolley kill the 4 people? I'll give you a second to make a choice. Most people say yes. They would change their minds. They wouldn't pull the lever now. They wouldn't be able to pull the lever because that would mean taking an action that would kill someone they know and love. But when asked if it would be the right thing to do to let the 4 people die, the same people say, no, it's not the right thing. It's just a thing I'm going to choose to do anyway. So why do we change our minds when our hearts are engaged? We all know this kind of conflict. We feel it, and we recognize it in each other. We know what's right in our heads, but our hearts tug us in a different direction. I shouldn't cheat on this test, but I want to do well on it so badly that if I just peek at the paper. I shouldn't lie to my best friend, but I'm afraid of what he'll think if I tell him the truth, so if I just tell him. I shouldn't cheat on my spouse, but I feel so good when I'm with this other person that I just can't stop. It's so much like Paul, and we wrote in his letter to the Romans, if you remember. I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. I can will what is right, but I cannot do it. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. Apparently, ours are not new struggles, at least. I have another trolley dilemma number 2.
Picture now a similar scenario. Train going down the track, 4 people in peril, but this time there's no switch, no alternate track available. There is a bridge that goes over the track, and this time Steve is on the bridge looking down at the 4 people below. But he's not completely powerless to help, because he's not alone on the bridge. He's up there with another guy, a guy who's large enough that if dropped in front of a speeding locomotive, would definitely stop it. Bluntly speaking, if Steve pushed the guy off the bridge, he'd die, but the other 4 would be spared. So what should Steve do this time?
Remember, thought experiment, not real life. The real question is, what's the best thing to do? What should Steve do? What would you do? Push the large man off the bridge and kill 1 person? Or don't do anything and let 4 people die? I can see from your faces what you think you'd do. There's no way to get out of the scenario. I tried really hard on this one. You can't shout down from the bridge so they hear you. You can't jump off yourself. You don't weigh enough to stop the train. And because the man is already leaning over the edge to see what's going on, you're strong enough, you can push him off. The only question is to push or not to push. Push and save 4 people. Don't push and let 4 people die. What's the right thing? This time, only 56% think it's best to push the man onto the tracks, which seems high. And there are obvious reasons for the change of mind and heart, why many of us are not willing to do that, right? Pushing a man off a bridge is different than pulling a lever. It's more up close and personal, and it feels more intentional. Even if the results and our degree of guilt will be the same, the fact is that we have trouble answering the 2 dilemmas in logically consistent ways. Is there really a good reason why we would pull the lever and not push the large man? Or to take an example closer to home, is there a good reason why you would cheat on your taxes and then teach your children not to cheat at school? There's some interesting answers coming from the field of neuroethics today, before you get too uncomfortable in your pews. It turns out that our frontal lobes are engaged when people decide not to pull the lever, which means we're all making a more rational choice. When we consider pushing the large man off the bridge, then our emotional centers are more activated, and we're making a less rational choice. Most interesting, that's not too surprising, but most interesting is the data that shows that psychopaths use reason in all versions of the trolley dilemma. Pull the lever, push the man off the bridge. There are several more dilemmas you can look up online later today if you want. They easily and readily base their actions to pull the lever and to push the man off the bridge on a rational assessment of the situation. Less harm due to fewer people. More happiness given to more people. Which makes sense, because taking action, making choices in difficult cases when someone will be hurt no matter what we choose, which happens a lot in life, requires either that we overcome our empathetic emotions or that we be willing to feel and suffer the consequences of our actions. These thought experiments are easy for psychopaths because they don't feel empathy. I argued 2 weeks ago, for those of you who are here or who won't hear, when I talked about the robotic era we are now entering, that it is precisely our capacity to feel that makes us still valuable today as human beings and what actually makes us human. So rather than only feeling guilty that we would let 4 people die because we didn't have the discipline or the will or the courage to pull the lever or push the man off the bridge in order to prevent those deaths, we can also feel proud that we love each other enough to accept the responsibility of action and of inaction, and suffer the consequences when our actions end up harming others. I think it's okay that we're unpredictable and not always rational in our decision-making. I certainly wouldn't want to overcome my emotions so that all my decision-making is based purely on reason. I don't want to live in a world in which relationships and love are irrelevant, and I doubt you do. But I do want to understand why I'm making the choices I make. So I invite you this morning to consider what values stand at the center of your ethical universe. Honor, truth, rights, human rights, the kind of person you want to be, what will result in the most happiness for the most people. To support you in finding this ethical center that I'm loosely describing, not that I assume you've lost it, and that's why you're in church this morning, I'm going to offer you one last thought experiment. There's no trolley this time, no movie. Instead, imagine a doctor, a brilliant transplant surgeon. She has 4 patients, all in the ICU, each waiting for a different organ to save their lives. During an intake exam on a new patient, a young man who happens to be passing through her city, our surgeon discovers that the man's blood type is compatible with all 4 of her dying patients. Would it be the best thing for our doctor to take the organs from the one man to save the lives of the 4 other people? Before you object loudly about how gross this is and unlikely, remember that this is a thought experiment too. You don't know who the 4 people are, how old they are, whether or not they're contributing members of society or parents or people you know and love, none of that. There are only 2 choices. She takes the organs and one man dies. She doesn't harvest the organs and 4 people die. What should she do? If you were a transplant surgeon, what would you do? If you're like most people, you decided quickly she should treat the poor man and leave his poor organs alone. Which means there's something we value more than saving a life, even many lives. We value, most of us anyway, the man's individual right to choose what happens to his own body, to determine his own destiny. The doctor doesn't have the patient's consent. Our ideas about rights, then, shape our thoughts, our feelings, and our choices. We know it's wrong for her to take his organs without his permission, no matter what good consequences, seemingly good consequences, could come from the multiple surgeries. Which means that the ends in this case don't justify the means. And utilitarianism, which is doing what will bring the most happiness to the most people, has serious limitations as a value for helping us make the difficult decisions we face. It also means that for most of us, protecting life is not an absolute value. If we had more time, I would gladly share more scenarios with you. Maybe we'll do a class on ethics together some point this year. They're tough. These thought experiments are tough, which is good because they push us to examine our core beliefs and values and to compare them to our thoughts, feelings, and most of all, to our actions in our day-to-day lives. But I don't want you to go away today without doing some of your own digging. It's easy to watch a movie or listen to me talk. So I'm going to invite you to take the index card that has been conveniently placed in the pew back in front of you and find a pen or a pencil. If you don't have one, you can ask a neighbor. Whatever you write is going to be only for you to see, no sharing. So thinking of the thought experiments we've seen and what your core values are: life, truth, rights, kind of person you want to be. So start by just writing your name in the middle of the card. There's no need to cheat on this, so there's no test, so no ethical challenge, only to follow my instructions. So I'm just making sure everybody's ready. Everybody has a pencil or a pen. I'm sure a neighbor can help you if you don't. So write your name in the center of your card. Now in the top left-hand corner, write down one belief, can be a religious belief or not, up to you, that you cherish. One belief that you cherish in the top left-hand corner. And now in the top right-hand corner, I'd ask you to write down one religious belief you were taught or that was passed down to you that you've rejected. Top right-hand corner. One religious belief that you were taught or was passed down to you that you've rejected. You thought I was joking when I said I was inviting you to be theologians today, but I wasn't. And now in the bottom left-hand corner, I'd ask you to write down the names of the religious communities or traditions you were born into, have adopted, and or rejected. Bottom left. And now in the bottom right-hand corner, it's the last corner, so you're almost done, write down one ethical or religious issue that you're struggling with and would like to explore. Could be a social issue of the day, could be something that's happening in your own personal life, could be something at work, an ethical struggle, a religious struggle. So thank you for engaging in our own thought experiment here. Now, actively with yourself. Some of you might still be finishing up. I'm just going to start talking a little bit more. I'd invite you to take this card with you as you leave this sanctuary and consider talking about it with your friends and your family this week as you think about the person you want to be, as you consider these choices that I've put in front of you today, as you evaluate if your words and your actions are aligned with the vision of the person you aspire to be. What matters most to you? Our reaction to the trolley dilemmas, a common human reactions to the trolley dilemmas, reveals that we want out of the responsibility of making choices. Just like Abraham really wanted out of the responsibility and was happy to obey. But the act of making choices is the challenge of being human. When I was a girl, I used to cry about this. How could we be so inhumane to each other? The world can feel overwhelming in its complexity and in its consequences. We can feel like we have too much responsibility and we're not up to the task. But the thought experiments, one after another, show us that there's no way out. When we act and when we don't act, there will be consequences. So we, in this religious community, are going to keep talking about it. Marlon, next week, will talk about Bruce Jenner and gender. We have a Hot Topics in Tulsa series this summer to engage with the tough issues that are facing our city right now, lined up for the point in July. And we have lots of support from each other in this congregation to face our own tough internal conflicts together and become better theologians in the process. So let us close by welcoming each other into this new community of theologians and embracing the responsibilities and the possibilities of being human together. Amen.
Thanks for tuning in online. We are so pleased with all the different people who have been tuning in from all over the country and all over the world to our ministry and what we're doing at All Souls here in Tulsa. If you have a chance to send me an email or connect with me in some way, let me know what you're finding, why you tune in, and what you're getting out of it. I would love to hear from you. I'm always pleased when I get messages from different people who tell me all kinds of things about the impact of All Souls Tulsa's ministry on them and their lives and their families. And if you get a chance to make a gift to support this ministry, to become a partner, we would love to partner with you and have you be a friend of the church and somebody who is actually supporting us to create this congregation and the world that we're trying to create together. You can be a part of it, and every gift of every amount makes a difference. We really appreciate your support.